When people say, why don't you just pack up, sell your property and move? Right there is the reason, folks. This is what I see from one of my lower cherry orchards on the side of Cherry Hill. That's Mount Adams, and this is the Yakima River. And when I see that picture, it makes me want to fight, fight, fight. Well, CARE is an activist group, grassroots activist group that was formed in the early 1990s. And essentially 90% of our membership is farmers. I'm a farmer in the Yakima Valley for about 50 years. We looked at the situation that began early in the 1990s, and several of us were very, very concerned about what we saw happening to our valley. The Yakima Valley is a very beautiful and diverse area. We have a long, rich agricultural history, and sustainable farming operations were always a part of that tapestry. Let's see, I screwed up here just a minute. And these farmers were our neighbors and our friends, and there was few, if any, problems with this combination of small sustainable dairies and us living in the same valley together. Then, out-of-state dairy operations moved in, invaded our valley, mainly from Chino, California. And carefully and very systematically, they began to select low-income areas of the valley where they could establish their operations. And in a 16-mile corridor from Granger to Grandview, we have over 76 dairy operations ranging from 1,000 to 16,000 head that began their operations. And our dairy industry changed from this to this. Now what you're going to see is animals that are kept contained in this area under lights 24 hours a day, never see green pasture. That's not mud. That's feces and urine that's been turned into slurry. These animals are kept in this kind of a situation for about 6 months out, or about 5 months out of the year. And then, if you can imagine all of this manure and feces now, or urine, now dried and in a powder form, then that's how they live the next 7 months of the year. Now, because of operations like this, we are now dumping onto our fields in the lower valley alone 6 times more untreated sewage than that created by the entire population of Seattle. Now, early on in this invasion of our valley, a professor from Washington State University looked at this situation. Back. Okay. Looked at this situation, and he made this statement. Time to read that. The beauty of our valley has been compromised because of the filth and the ugliness that these factory dairy operations bring to our lives. But most importantly, the destruction that they create to our air, ground, and surface water can no longer be overlooked, nor can the negative health effects that they create with the residents of our valley. The pollution that we experience here on a daily basis is caused because profit rather than protection of our environment is the #1 motivation for these dairy operations. The statement can be supported when we view the lack of responsibility these factory dairy operators show in the disposal of their waste manure. Now, this is the operation of one of the leading spokespersons in Washington State. He's the leading member of the Washington State Dairy Federation. And when he bought this property, the first thing he did was go in and destroy the natural drain that ran down through there. And then on top of this natural drain, this is where he built his feedlot and his milking parlor. And then he moved down onto the hillside area, and then he cut into the hillside a pit where he could store his silage, and the waste from both the feedlot and the silage run down into this stagnant pond. Really not a pond, it's really an illegal catch basin, because there's, with the tires covered, that's a silage pit there. This pond, stagnant pond, is there year-round. It never goes away because we're in a high water table area. And here we can see the overflow from this stagnant pond running out into the bar ditch. And you can see here, if we had a little bit better resolution, you can see those brown kind of swirls. That's actually manure that is in the water there. And the overflow then flows into the Yakima River. Now this is not a one-time occurrence. Notice this video here that was taken in 1996. And you'll notice that he's spraying liquid manure onto snow, which is over frozen ground. And this is an intentional violation of the law. Now, look at the topography here, because I'm going to show you another photograph very soon, and you're going to see it's almost like deja vu. Now again, this was taken in 1996, and this picture was taken in 2006. 1 decade later, and you can see hardly anything has changed. And even though there's been major spills in this area, and there's been repeated violations, nothing has been done to correct the problem. In fact, this is really frequently discussed at the local coffee shops, and jokes are made about there's no enforcement. This lack of enforcement has essentially given the factory dairy operators a blank check to destroy our environment. The over-application of waste material, both solid and liquids, is a year-round event, even though the Conservation Handbook states that manure should only be put on the soil and tilled under 6 weeks before crops are planted. But as you can see here, they don't obey those rules, because we have manure being put on in early spring, late spring, early summer, late summer. We have it stockpiled in early fall. It's applied after the harvest. It's applied in every way you can imagine. And all of this filth runs out, all of this manure and all these pollutants runs out into the Yakima River. And you can go down to the Yakima River on a daily basis and you can see this picture repeated. Now my husband used to fish in this area, and he would catch edible trout. This is now classified as a 303D stream, which means that it is unfit for human contact. The quality control person for the Yakima Valley irrigation project made this statement in a local newspaper. Even though the dairy industry tries very diligently to pass the buck for the pollution that they create, recently when EPA conducted a DNA study of the pollution of the Granger drain, this is what the report revealed. And one of the classics that they try to do is that it's not us causing the problem, it's commercial fertilizer and leaky septic tanks. Now, last summer, when this unlined dirt hole in the ground, really frequently called a lagoon, could no longer hold the liquid sewage and other materials in there, the dairy farmer found it no problem to get his tractor out, go out into the field and construct a very loose pile of dirt along the boundary line between him and his neighbors. And he then pumped into this 5-acre area, 2 to 5 feet deep. He pumped all of his liquid sewage out of this lagoon. Now, someone was asking about the smell. This in no way smells like good, clean manure from a good, clean barnyard or out in the field like that. This, if you've ever been around a septic tank when it's being pumped, this is what this smells like. When we went out there the first time, this is about a week after, you can see it started to crust over. But when we went over the first time, we actually got dry heaves. The dump site was well within 150 feet of 5 different homes, and this exposed both children and elderly residents to these noxious gases. Now, this was reported to Department of Ecology, to the Department of Ag, and to the Yakima County Health Department. This is Jenny Priest. She came out from the Yakima Department of Ag, and she looked over this situation, and she made a judgment call that this was perfectly okay, And her reasoning here is that eventually, once this had either seeped into the soil or had been evaporated into the air, then the dairyman was going to come back, get the dry material, scoop it up, and take it back to his feedlot in order to make bedding for his animals. Now, we know for a fact that there's 3 laws broken right there. I won't go into this, but we know that that's true. But she just said, oh, this is perfectly okay, no problem at all. The Department of Ecology was then advised that, and they said that this area was not of no concern to them, even though we provided photographs of intentionally spraying this material into the irrigation canal, and we showed them photographs of where this had, see the dry manure around there, where this had been dumped into a manhole cover that directly connected with the Yakima River. The Yakima County Health Department was then advised of this problem, and they said, well, the dump had occurred in the agricultural area, so they were going to look into it at all, even though this area has very shallow wells and even though the air was polluted. And that's how our government agencies enforce the law in the Yakima Valley. Now, directly to the west of this site, there is where the water table is 2 to 5 feet deep, and the wells here are about 80 to 90 feet deep. This waste from the barn washout and from the nearby fields was put onto this area here, probably about 4 acres, something like that, about 2 feet deep, and the contents containing antibiotics, detergents, pesticides, iodine, human waste, disinfectants, bacteria, milk residue, cow feces, and urine was then allowed to lay on the field until the liquid part could seep into the soil, or the liquid would evaporate into the air. Now, this is 10 feet away from the nearest resident. You can see the driveway there. The improper disposal of this material has caused excessively high ammonia readings, and these readings are very high. We're up in some of them, even in, not this one in particular, but we have some that are over 7,000 parts per billion. The Iowa study says that anything, even for a short duration, anything over 150 parts is causes great health damage. Now, we have had well studies done in this area, and it shows that the well water is filled with fecal material, with E. coli, with nitrates, and other bacteria. And when, out of curiosity, I asked one of the men that lives in this area, I said, why did you decide to spend the money to get a well test? And he said, I thought I oughta. The well water had turned brown. We have areas in this valley where the doctors and other people in the health department have told them not to bathe, drink, or even come in contact with these wells. Research of the wells from Wapato to Grandview was done by 2 independent scientific laboratories. The results show that from Granger to Grandview, where there is extremely high concentrations of nitrates. Now, this coincidentally is where we have a high concentration of dairy factories. Now, in the Wapato to Zilla area, also heavily farmed, but without factory dairy operations, the nitrate levels here were well below the 10 parts per million that are allowed by federal government. And so residents began to suck up the cost of the irresponsibility of these dairy operations, and we have to buy reverse osmosis machines, or we have to bring in bottled water in order to have clean drinking water in our own homes. Now, those that cannot afford the money to do these things take a terrible risk with both their health and their well-being. Now, this is a year-round stream, and these are being destroyed systematically by the factory dairies. This is a habitat just down the road from me where small animals, birds, and fish made their home. Now, it evolved from this into a drain field, where you can see manure lined up along there, into an entombed river flow or water flow. And the reason for this trade-off here is a really good reason. Now the wheel line can run up and down this area without being impaired, and it can flow, put on additional liquid manure. And I've even seen it when I came down to where it was putting on so much that this manhole cover was completely covered with manure from the runoff, so it's not being put on there agronomically. Another stream just up the road from me was also entombed, and this gave, the reason for this is it gave the dairy cows about 12 to 15 more feet of roaming space in their pen. But as you can see, the water hasn't found a home for itself, and so it continues to pollute in a different way, be polluted in a different way. Now, many of our year-round streams, and if you could look closely, you'll see that there's cattails, there's reeds, and if we looked a little bit closer, even watercress growing in there, are being destroyed, and they are turned from this sort of a thing into this. And this is the same point of view. I took the first picture from the bridge looking down, and then I came down on this one after it was destroyed, and I took it from the field looking back up to the bridge. Now, if the water does happen to go into a natural drain, these natural drains are being straightened, and then all the vegetation is taken out. This vegetation is what system, normally would filter the water. But instead, they've decided to take out the vegetation, and they line these ditches then, or these stream beds, with rock and gravel. Now, springs, natural springs, are not off the hit list here. This is a picture at the top. If you looked over a little bit to what would be your left, there's a spring over here that used to, at one time, supplied water for 5 different families. At this point in time, a dairy moved in. This is their manure pile that sits just to the right of that spring. And here is where they dump their dead animals, along with the hypodermic needles and medicine bottles that they're no longer using. Now, when the type 5 streams are no longer in use, they find this a convenient spot to dump their dead animals. Now, I want you to make sure you look at this, because this is an animal that's been out there and decayed over a long period of time, and this is a brand new batch of them. I've got about 10 more pictures that I can show, but I didn't want to rub it into the ground. So you can see that this is not a one-time occurrence, and what you're going to hear from the dairy industry is that when you see pictures like this, oh, this is a one-time occurrence, or this is just one bad apple in the barrel. That's not true. Let's look at it this way. There's 1 or 2 good apples in the barrel, and the majority of these people operate their factory farms like this. Now, this area here is just totally and completely saturated with a wheel line going over and over and over it with liquid manure. Yet in the same week that this picture was taken, he again put on a slurry. And you can see again. Now, this is in addition to a January and a February application that he put on. Now, this is another dairy operation just down the road from me, and he decided that right after Thanksgiving, this would be a good time to spray all this liquid manure on. Now, what you're seeing here is not dirt. You are seeing these plants, this grain crop for next year, absolutely and completely coated with manure. The runoff from this lasted all through the winter time, running directly into the Yakima River, and it will run well into next year's irrigation season. And having neighbors around real close, this is sprayed right into their backyard, doesn't deter these dairymen from getting rid of their toxic garbage. Let's see, way back. The WSU professor said that there was actually not enough land in the whole, not just the lower valley, but in the whole of the Yakima Valley to agronomically apply the manure that's being produced by these operations. The constant stockpiling of this waste creates additional pollution problems. This brown that you see here in the background is not plowed soil. That is waste matter, manure, that has been dumped from 6 to 18 feet deep over many, many acres of land. Manure stockpiles like this are usually located on hillsides or on slopes where the liquids can conveniently move into either the drains, the rivers, or the wetlands area. This photo is a picture of a 20-acre orchard that was pulled in order for the dairymen to come in and use the natural depressions in the hillside there to dump the slurry from his nearby feedlot. We are looking here at about a 2 to 5 acre area, and this is the depression in this area is probably about 12 to 15 feet deep. This is bordered on the north by a major irrigation canal, and there's 2 type 5 streams that run through this. So this is just really a spill that's just waiting to happen. Now, here's another operator that has manure that is stored right next to a stream. It is well within the protected riparian area that is set aside by the Yakima County, but nothing, it's a violation and nothing is done about it. Now, here's the mother of all manure piles. This is millions, literally millions of tons of raw manure and sludge being stored in a high water table area without a containment floor or walls in order to control the pollution runoff. This area is populated by many low-income or minority families whose only source of drinking water comes from these shallow wells. This is the lower end of the pile, about a half mile down the road from it. The pile is probably about 3 football fields wide, and this down here at the lower end is probably 30 feet high. Now, when you look at this, you can also see clearly documented why we have what I feel to be economic discrimination. Because how many of these people living in these homes do you think can go out and hire a lawyer to fight the damage being done to their property or the damage being done to their health? For those of us that live and work in these rural areas, pollution has expanded into many different facets of our lives, and our rights as citizens have been violated. There are violations on health issues for residents and for dairy workers due to the manure dust, the flies, the contaminated water and air. There is also destruction to our communities for their economic development and for our rural towns also. We are literally frightened that our property value is going to be diminished beyond belief. Our personal rights, we already know, have been lost, and our quality of life is greatly diminished. We are also afraid and live in total fear that our water system is going to be either totally destroyed or totally dried up. And these rights, I believe, belong to us as citizens in rural areas. And I don't think that we're being protected, because the very agencies that are being paid to protect us are not doing the job. And they have submitted to the political power of corporate agriculture. And the economic chokehold that these dairy operations hold on the valley makes it absolutely impossible to get into the legal system so that we can retain the rights that are ours. And our needs are very simple. We're not asking for a lot. We simply believe that as rural residents, we have the right to have clean air. We have the right to have safe drinking water. We have the right to have sustainable farms around us with continued productive soil. We have the rights to a democratically led community development. We have the rights to stable property value, and we have the rights to a healthy wildlife habitat. And finally, we have a right to keep a quality of life and health that is safe and enduring. And I would ask you, as you conduct your investigation, try real hard to separate the dairy industry myths that you will see on a regular basis from the reality of the industry that you've seen here today. Thank you.